On November 18, 1978, in a remote jungle compound in Guyana, tragedy struck. More than 900 people, men, women, and even children died in a single day, all poisoned by cyanide-laced drinks. But what happened at Jonestown wasn't just another mass murder carried out by a brutal dictator or warlord. What makes it even more chilling is this: they drank willingly. This was Jonestown, the deadliest cult massacre in modern history. And at the center of it all was a man named Jim Jones, using nothing but his words, his charisma, and relentless psychological tactics. He convinced more than 900 intelligent, capable people to end their own lives. So, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how is this even possible? How do seemingly rational people become so blinded, so obedient, that they walk knowingly toward their own destruction? We all like to believe that intelligence is some kind of armor, that if someone is educated, rational, and aware, they could never fall into such a trap. But history keeps proving us wrong. Again and again, we see that it's not evil, but stupidity is. Stupidity that shapes some of the most catastrophic events in human history. Stupidity is more dangerous than evil. That's not just my opinion. This is exactly what the German theologian and anti-Nazi resistance fighter, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, realized during one of humanity's darkest moments, Nazi Germany. While most people blamed evil for the horrors of the 20th century, Bonhoeffer made a truly terrifying observation. He said, "Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than evil." But why? Seriously, how can stupidity possibly be more dangerous than pure evil? The answer is even more disturbing than you might expect. We're taught to fear evil. We think that the greatest dangers to society come from those who act with malice, who want to hurt others. But Bonhoeffer noticed something more insidious, something even harder to fight. According to him, evil can be confronted. It can be debated, reasoned with, and even some evil has an agenda, a motive, a kind of twisted logic. And someone acting out of evil often knows exactly what they're doing. Their actions are calculated, and they're aware of the consequences. Stupidity, however, is a completely different beast. Stupidity is immune to logic. You can't debate with it. You can't reason with it. It doesn't seek destruction with intent, but its very nature often leads to terrible outcomes. A person acting out of stupidity can be more dangerous than someone acting out of malice, because while evil has limits, it needs planning. It faces opposition. Stupidity is boundless. It's self-sustaining, and worst of all, it thrives in society without almost any resistance. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is thinking that ignorance and stupidity are the same thing. But Bonhoeffer was clear: there's a huge difference. Ignorance just means lacking knowledge. You haven't heard the facts or seen the evidence. But here's the thing: ignorance can be fixed. The moment an ignorant person gets real information, they can learn, they can change. Stupidity is different. It's not about lacking facts. It's about rejecting them, no matter how much evidence is piled up in front of you. A stupid person refuses to accept new facts, even the ones that are undeniable. They ignore logic, dismiss reasoning, and cling to a belief for dear life. This is what makes stupidity so dangerous. The more someone falls into it, the deeper they dig in, and the harder it is for them to get out. They double down on their false beliefs, surround themselves with people who agree with them, and label any contradicting information as lies or propaganda. Instead of searching for the truth, they look for comfort in what they already believe. Pretty soon, logic can't reach them anymore. This resistance to reason isn't just an individual problem. It's shaped some of history's greatest disasters. Time after time, we see leaders making catastrophic choices, not because they didn't know better, but because they stubbornly refused to accept reality. Take the NASA Challenger disaster. In 1986, the space shuttle was set to launch on a chilly January morning, and multiple engineers raised red flags. They warned that the O-rings critical shuttle components weren't designed for such low temperatures. The evidence was clear. The warnings were loud, but those at the top refused to listen. They brushed the engineers' concerns aside, convinced the launch must go on as planned. The result: just 73 seconds after liftoff, Challenger exploded, killing all 7 astronauts on board. The real tragedy isn't that no one knew, it's that those in power refused to accept the inconvenient truth. It wasn't ignorance that caused this disaster, it was stupidity, a refusal to change course, no matter what the evidence showed. Stories like this echo throughout history. Political leaders have ignored intelligence reports, Generals have led troops into unwinnable wars, and corporations have dismissed expert warnings all because of arrogance and the stubborn unwillingness to admit they were wrong. But Bob saw something even more terrifying at work. Stupidity isn't just an individual failure, it's a social disease. It spreads in groups like a virus, infecting people who might otherwise be thoughtful and rational. And the bigger the group, the less likely any one person is to step back and think for themselves. This is why propaganda works so well. It's why mob mentality takes over. It's why, again and again, history keeps repeating the same disastrous mistakes. When people join a group, they often stop questioning and start outsourcing their thinking to the crowd. They simply go with the flow, trusting that if everyone else believes it, it must be true. As Bonhoeffer pointed out, the very moment someone stops thinking for themselves, they're no longer really an individual. They become a vessel for stupidity. That's why some of history's worst horrors weren't carried out by a handful of evil masterminds. They happened because huge numbers of ordinary people refused to question what they were told, surrendered their judgment, and just followed orders. Now, why is stupidity so impossible to fight? Maybe the most unsettling part of Bonhoeffer's theory is this: stupidity is almost completely immune to correction. If someone's made up their mind, not even mountains of evidence, passionate debate, or ironclad reasoning can change it. It's not that they lack facts, they simply refuse to listen. And that's what makes stupidity, in Bonhoeffer's eyes, the single greatest threat to any society. Not war, not crime, not even deliberate, organized evil, but silent, invisible force that quietly drives nations into ruin, spreads propaganda unchecked, and turns regular people into instruments of devastation. This is a force we just can't afford to ignore. Unlike evil, stupidity doesn't need a plan, an agenda, or a motive. It simply exists unnoticed and unchallenged until it's too late. And here's another crucial realization. Stupidity isn't just an individual flaw. It's a social disease, contagious and dangerously easy to spread. When stupidity becomes widespread, reinforced by social pressure, blind obedience, and propaganda, it can shape the fate of entire nations. Stupidity loves crowds. The second people stop thinking for themselves and start leaning on the group, they become vulnerable to its influence. That's why groupthink happens, a psychological phenomenon where people start adopting the dominant belief in their group, even if it's flat out wrong. Once that loop starts, stupidity spreads at lightning speed. One person's bad idea gets reinforced by another, until questioning the group becomes nearly impossible. This is the birthplace of blind obedience. And blind obedience is how history's greatest nightmares become reality. Let's dig deeper into how stupidity becomes such a powerful, contagious force in groups, and how that led to disasters like Jonestown. Because the terrifying truth is, dictators and authoritarian leaders have always understood a simple fact: stupidity is one of the most effective weapons. An intelligent, skeptical society is tough to control, but a society that obeys without question, that's every dictator's dream. Think about Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. He didn't need an entire country of evil people. All he needed was a population that was too obedient, too scared, and too unwilling to think for themselves. The Nazi regime thrived, not because Germans were uniquely cruel, but because their critical thinking was eroded by propagandist rallies, powerful, emotional speeches, and media control, all hammered home one message: don't question, don't think, just follow. Even those who doubted stayed silent, fearing they'd become outcasts or be punished. The evil didn't spread through force alone. It spread through passive compliance and the silence of people who gave up their ability to think for themselves. This is exactly why Bonhoeffer considered stupidity more dangerous than evil, because evil requires intent, but stupidity needs nothing but silence. Why people surrender their thinking, social pressure, and obedience experiments to really understand why we're so vulnerable to this kind of collective stupidity. Let's look at what psychologists have found about social pressure. 1. The Milgram experiment. Why we obey in the 1960s. Psychologist Stanley Milgram ran a now legendary experiment. He told participants they were helping with a study on learning by giving electric shocks which weren't real to another person, supposedly as punishment for wrong answers. The participants heard fake screams, pleas for mercy, even silence. That suggested the person had passed out. Most participants still pressed the button. believing they'd given lethal shocks all because a man in a lab coat told them to continue. People obeyed, even when they wanted to stop. Why? Because the authority figure told them to. The Milgram experiment proved something chilling. Ordinary people can commit horrific acts, not out of evil, but from blind obedience to authority. 2. The Asch conformity experiment. Why we ignore the truth. Another psychologist, Solomon Asch, designed a different test. He put participants in a group except that everyone else was an actor. The group was shown a picture of lines and asked which was the longest. Even though the answer was obvious, all the actors gave the same, clearly incorrect, answer out loud, that the real participant usually went last. What happened? More than 75% of participants conformed at least once, choosing the wrong answer just because everyone else did. They ignored what was right in front of them to fit in with the group. These experiments reveal something disturbing. Most of us will go along with the group or obey authority, even when we know it's wrong. That's exactly how stupidity spreads. How this plays out at scale. The disaster of Jonestown. All of this helps explain what happened at Jonestown. Jim Jones, using nothing but charisma and psychological manipulation, convinced more than 900 people, intelligent, diverse, often idealistic individuals, to uproot their lives and move to a jungle settlement in Guyana. What started as a religious and social movement soon turned into an authoritarian system where Jones controlled every aspect of his followers' lives. Paranoia and pressure grew. Those who questioned Jones found themselves isolated or attacked by the group. Fear, conformity, and relentless groupthink all made independent thought impossible. By November 1978, as negative publicity and outside investigations closed in, Jones's grip tightened until, in one horrific day, he ordered the mass suicide that left over 900 people, men, women, and children dead from poisoned drinks. Some tried to resist, but most gave in, unable, after years of indoctrination, peer pressure, and exhaustion, to find the strength to break from the collective. Stupidity as a social epidemic. When you look at the worst events in history, the common thread isn't always individual evil. It's the way stupidity spreads from person to person, reinforced by blind obedience to authority, fear of standing out, social pressure to conform, echo chambers where only one perspective is accepted. This creates a feedback loop of ignorance and irrationality, making it almost impossible for anyone inside the group to speak up or think critically. The results of why it matters today. Authoritarian leaders thrive in societies where people don't question orders. Propaganda succeeds when people accept information uncritically. Conspiracies and misinformation spread when nobody challenges the narrative. Each time, stupidity is what makes these catastrophes possible, not just at Jonestown or in Nazi Germany, but in politics, corporations, and ordinary life. The scariest part: once stupidity takes root, it's almost impossible to uproot. People who stop questioning, stop thinking. But Bonhoeffer believed there's hope if we constantly fight back by thinking for ourselves and questioning everything, even when it's hard. Because if we don't, history will continue to repeat itself. How power and stupidity intertwine. Let's explore a disturbing pattern. Bonhoeffer identified stupidity doesn't just emerge among the uninformed or uneducated, actually thrives within centers of power. The higher someone climbs, the more likely they are to fall prey to blindness, arrogance, and ultimately, catastrophic foolishness. The illusion of infallibility. We often assume that people in positions of authority, world leaders, CEOs, high-ranking officials, must also be the most intelligent and insightful. After all, how else would they achieve so much power? But history keeps proving that power and intelligence aren't the same thing. In fact, the more powerful someone becomes, the more insulated they become from criticism and reality. This separation encourages not only arrogance, but also the kind of groupthink that allows stupidity to spiral out of control. Why does power breed foolishness? Isolation from reality. The powerful rarely feel the consequences of their own actions, the way ordinary people do. If a politician makes a disastrous policy, it's the public that suffers most. If a CEO takes reckless risks, it's the employees who bear the brunt. Yes-man effect. Leaders surround themselves with advisors and subordinates who reinforce their beliefs, whether out of fear, loyalty, or ambition. Anything critical is stifled. Dismissal of warnings. Past successes convince powerful people that their judgment is flawless, so they ignore or downplay expert warnings and criticism. This dynamic creates an echo chamber where bad decisions multiply and go uncorrected. The higher a person climbs, the less likely they are to see or admit to their own stupidity. The catastrophic results power-induced stupidity has fueled some of the most notorious disasters in history. Here's how this played out in real-life examples. 2008 financial crisis. Executives at major banks ignored repeated warnings from economists about reckless lending and the dangers of subprime mortgages. Many believed their institutions were too big to fail and dismissed the possibility of collapse. Arrogance, overconfidence, and a refusal to listen to outside voices resulted in a global economic calamity. Chernobyl disaster, 1986. The Soviet leadership prioritized pride and secrecy over safety. Plant supervisors ignored warnings and pushed the reactor past its limits, overriding protocols and silencing engineers who tried to speak up. The result was one of the worst nuclear disasters in history, caused not by a lack of expertise, but by a system that punished critical thinking and rewarded blind compliance. Corporate meltdowns. Time and again, companies led by isolated leaders have plunged into scandal or collapsed outright because warnings were ignored and mistakes went unacknowledged. These aren't just accidental oversights. They are direct outcomes of power-blinding leaders to reality and fueling cycles of stupidity. Why? Authoritarian leaders foster stupidity. Authoritarian leaders, whether in politics, corporations, or even smaller organizations, often use strict, top-down control. This style stifles dissent and critical thinking. Absolute authority and little input. Decisions are made unilaterally. Those below are expected to simply obey without question. Control over all details. Authoritarian leaders want to know, organize, and supervise every process, discouraging delegation and independent thinking. Suppression of opposition. Criticism is often punished, either directly through penalties or indirectly by stifling career advancement for dissenters. Manipulation of information. Controlling media narratives, spreading disinformation, and delegitimizing critics are standard techniques, creating dependency and fear by positioning themselves as essential and irreplaceable. Such leaders create an environment where followers are afraid to challenge the status quo. This creates a toxic feedback loop. The more control and obedience are enforced, the less information real decision-makers get, and the more isolated they become from any reality checks. As a result, even intelligent institutions can fall into catastrophic error. The authoritarian playbook. Classic tactics research shows that modern authoritarians use a predictable set of strategies to maintain power and suppress independent thought. Tactic description. Politicizing independent institutions, capturing courts, police, or oversight bodies to ensure loyalty over impartiality. Spreading disinformation. Flooding the public discourse with falsehoods and amplifying propaganda. Aggrandizing executive power, expanding personal authority, while weakening checks and balances. Quashing dissent. Silencing opposition through intimidation, censorship, or criminalizing critiques. Scapegoating vulnerable communities, dividing society. Blaming minorities or other outgroups for wider problems. Corrupting elections, manipulating voting processes to cement control while maintaining a facade of legitimacy. Stoking violence. Tolerating, or even encouraging violence to instill fear and division. These patterns have enabled authoritarian systems throughout history, and they remain a constant danger today. Psychological manipulation and group dynamics. Authoritarian strategies don't just rely on laws or brute force. They deeply exploit human psychology, divide and rule. Leaders manufacture us versus them narratives, ramping up collective paranoia and making it seem as if the leader is the only protector. Manipulation of stress and fear. By triggering anxiety, leaders make people more dependent on authority for a sense of safety, reducing resistance to illogical or harmful policies. Normalization of political violence. When breaking social norms becomes standard, some people follow unconsciously, believing it's just the way things are now. Echo chambers. Tight, loyal groups form self-reinforcing bubbles, where dissent is not only discouraged, it's demonized. But once these methods take hold, entire societies can find themselves trapped not by conscious evil, but by a powerful current of unexamined, cascading stupidity. Why groupthink is so dangerous and how to resist it. History shows us that groupthink isn't just a theoretical concept, it can cause disaster on a massive scale. But if stupidity is so contagious and ingrained in collective human behavior, is there any way to stop it? And if so, how can organizations and individuals fight back? Let's break down practical strategies for combating collective stupidity in everyday life, organizations, and society as a whole. How groupthink spreads unchecked. Groupthink flourishes when dissent is discouraged, questioning is punished, and conformity is rewarded. It's easy for a group to drift from rational disagreement to total consensus, not because everyone actually agrees, but because nobody wants to be the one who challenges the mood of the room. This, more than any genius-level manipulation, is how cults like Jonestown, rigid governance, and even big corporations lose touch with reality. Emotional pressure to go along with the group, fear of standing out, being ridiculed or punished, belief that the group or leader knows best, lack of diversity of background, thought, or experience. This isn't limited to authoritarian regimes. Boards, executives, teams, and entire societies become vulnerable to the same forces. Proven strategies for breaking the cycle. Resisting groupthink takes conscious, often uncomfortable effort, but there are clear, effective methods. Here's what researchers and leadership experts recommend. 1. Prioritize psychological safety. People speak up and offer creative, sometimes dissenting ideas only if they feel safe to do so. Psychological safety means team members can disagree or describe problems without fear of punishment or ridicule. Ways to foster it include actively soliciting all opinions, especially dissenting ones, modeling vulnerability, and admitting mistakes. As a leader, treating problems as learning opportunities, not grounds for blame. Allowing anonymous contributions when appropriate. To protect those less comfortable speaking up. To deliberately promote diversity. Diversity isn't just about about real differences in experience, thinking style, and perspective, which naturally pushes back against echo chambers. Try recruiting team members with varied backgrounds and viewpoints, inviting outside experts or dissenting voices into discussions, encouraging debate and healthy challenge. 3. Structure meetings to encourage critical discussion. A meeting's design can make or break its ability to surface the best ideas. Some approaches to ensure thoughtful debate: assign a devil's advocate role to challenge prevailing opinions, rotating it to avoid bias. Use methods such as the 1-to-4 technique. Brainstorm individually, in pairs, groups of 4, then everyone to collect and refine ideas. Split the group and have each side argue opposing viewpoints. Then switch sides. Collect anonymous feedback before or during meetings to get honest opinions. 4. Create space for independent thought. Don't underestimate the power of individual reflection. Leaders can distribute meeting agendas or decision points early so everyone can prepare their input. Encourage team members to develop multiple solutions in isolation, then bring them together for group discussion. Provide both collaborative and quiet, independent work areas. 5. Reward and normalize dissent. If people see that questioning, respectful disagreement, and critical thinking are valued and rewarded, they'll be more likely to speak up next time. Publicly acknowledge and appreciate those who challenge assumptions or raise tough questions. Set clear ground rules that encourage constructive debate and exploration of what could go wrong. Table tactics to prevent groupthink. Strategy. Practical examples. Advocate 1. Team member must challenge each main proposal. Identifies weaknesses. Encourages rigor. Use anonymous feedback. Collect views on contentious issues without names. Surfaces honest opinions. Foster diverse teams. Recruit from various backgrounds and experiences. More perspectives, less blind spots. Demand critical review. Regularly ask, what are we missing? What could go wrong? Reveals risks. Prevents overconfidence. Independent pre-work team. Writes opinions or solutions before group talk. Lists swayed by leaders or peer pressure. Celebrate dissent. Praise challenging questions at meetings. Makes dissent common. Even expected. Individual responsibility matters. No organizational system is foolproof. At the end of the day, it takes courage to resist the pull of consensus, to pause and ask if you're following your own reason or just the crowd. Don't trust consensus. Interrogate it. Seek out opposing views, especially when you feel most certain. Watch for signs you're avoiding discomfort. rather than searching for truth. Why this fight is never over. Bonhoeffer's warning is chillingly relevant today. Stupidity won't announce itself. It seeps in quietly, through silence and conformity, and only resistance, questioning, dissent, and critical thinking can stop it from leading entire groups, organizations, or nations to disaster. Resisting groupthink isn't just an abstract ideal, it's an ongoing habit. By fostering safety for dissent, prioritizing diversity, building critical processes, and empowering independent thought, we arm ourselves and our communities against the dangerous comfort of unthinking consensus. Escaping the trap: how to build a society that thinks for itself. After everything we've seen about how stupidity spreads, infects, and shapes history, you might wonder, are we doomed to repeat our mistakes forever? Is there any way out? Or is our fate sealed by social pressure, propaganda, and the comfort of conformity? The answer, fortunately, is that the cycle can be broken, but only with deliberate effort and personal responsibility. Dietrich Bonhoeffer believed that stupidity wasn't just an intellectual shortcoming, but a moral one. People don't choose stupidity because of their IQ or lack of information. They choose it because it's easy. It's easier to believe what everyone around you says, easier to obey than to challenge, easier to swallow comforting lies than to face hard truths. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. The antidote to stupidity is always the same: critical thinking, intellectual humility, and a stubborn commitment to seeking the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Practical steps for individuals. 1. Train yourself to question everything. Don't take any piece of information at face value. This isn't about becoming paranoid or contrarian for the sake of it, but about active, mindful engagement. Ask, who benefits from me believing this? Look for evidence. Does the claim hold up under scrutiny, or does it rely on emotion and repetition? Seek contradictions. If new facts don't fit, don't ignore them. Mask why. 2. Recognize and resist emotional manipulation. Propaganda and misinformation nearly always hit where we're most vulnerable. Our emotions, fear, anger, and tribal loyalty are powerful tools for shifting attention away from facts. So, pay close attention to your own feelings. Notice when a message is trying to provoke outrage, fear, or blind loyalty. Pause before sharing anything that makes you emotional. Ask yourself if it's actually true or just emotionally charged. Make it a habit to calm down and double-check before reacting. 3. Step out of echo chambers. Social media, search algorithms, and our own habits all push us into bubbles where we only hear what we already believe. Break the cycle by deliberately following sources and people who challenge your perspective. Reading books, articles, and opinions from the other side. Having respectful, honest discussions with people whose views are radically different from yours. If you only hear what you want, you're not really thinking, you're just repeating. And repetition without examination is the foundation of stupidity. 4. Seek out intelligent decentral wisdom grows from confronting uncomfortable ideas. Instead of avoiding debate, embrace it. Surround yourself with people who are willing to question you. Value friends or colleagues who challenge your reasoning rather than those who just agree. If you avoid challenging conversations, you're probably clinging to comfort over truth. 5. Take responsibility for your beliefs and choice. Outsource your moral and intellectual judgment. If you support an idea, policy, or person, make sure it's because you've thought it through, because an authority or the majority told you to. Real intelligence isn't about how much you know, it's about your willingness to ask uncomfortable questions and, if needed, admit you were wrong. The collective side, building a culture of thought, individual effort, goes a long way. But societies thrive or fail based on their collective habits. Question authority at every level, never confuse position with wisdom. Politicians, CEOs, experts, all of them should be held to the same standards of logic and evidence. Respect authority, but never stop examining it. Reward curiosity, not compliance, whether in schools, workplaces, or families. Create spaces where it's safe and celebrated to ask why and what if. Teach kids to value questioning and mistake-making over just getting the right answer. Build institutions for transparency. The more open and accountable a system is, the less likely stupidity-driven decisions will go unchallenged. Whistleblower protections, independent oversight, and a free press are all critical. Fight misinformation relentlessly. When you see falsehoods spreading, call them out. Clarify, correct. Share reliable sources, and don't reward viral lies with a share or a like. The dangers of just following orders, as Bonhoeffer recognized. History's worst atrocities were not usually carried out by monsters, but by ordinary people who never stopped to question what they were doing, who justified choices by saying, "I was just doing what I was told." Never, ever surrender your responsibility to think for yourself. Being a good person means resisting stupidity, not just refusing to be evil. The final litmus test here is a simple mental exercise. Next time you're tempted to agree with a popular opinion, repeat a viral story, or support a new leader or policy, stop and ask, who benefits if I go along with this? Have I actually thought about it, or am I just repeating? Is my agreement based on facts, or on the security of belonging to the group? Am I comfortable simply because everyone else is comfortable? Most importantly, am I thinking for myself, or letting someone else do it for me? If you never pause to ask, what if I'm wrong? If you refuse to see when you might be following blindly, then you are already on the path Bonhoeffer warned us about. The reality. Stupidity is the real threat. When we look at history's greatest crimes, genocide, war, systemic oppression, they weren't the work of singularly evil masterminds. They happened because everyday people failed to think, failed to question, failed to stand up even when their conscience whispered that something was wrong. It's easy to imagine we'd have been different, that we would have seen through the lies, stood up to the mob, challenged the mad leader. But would we really, or would we, like so many before us, drift with the crowd because it felt safe? Today's new tools for stupidity, the internet, social media, and algorithm-driven news feeds mean stupidity can travel faster and further than ever before. The consequences are still unknown, but the warning signs are everywhere. Absurd conspiracy theories, viral misinformation, and entire populations polarizing into tribes that can't even agree on basic facts. But while the tools have changed, the threat has not. As Bonhoeffer feared, stupidity thrives when people stop thinking. The only way out, the only way to protect yourself, your community, and even your country is to seize the responsibility of thinking for yourself, seeking the truth, and questioning everything, no matter how uncomfortable it is. So, the next time you see a viral story or hear a popular slogan, before you react, share, or agree, ask yourself, am I thinking, or just following? Because stupidity is quiet, invisible, and unstoppable unless you choose to resist it. Every single day. If you found this deep dive valuable, and want to learn more about the hidden forces shaping human psychology, about the traps, the biases, and the invisible influences that shape the way we think and act, subscribe to Hidden Truths now. The more you question, the harder it is for stupidity to take hold. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and, above all, never stop thinking for yourself.